guys, so today I'm going to be teaching you how to sew a basic ribbon skirt. This is very beginner level. If you're just learning how to sew and you want to learn how to make ribbon skirts, this is the tutorial for you. So I hope you guys enjoy and let's go on and get into it. Okay, so in order to make a ribbon skirt, these are all of the supplies that I use, and of course you can choose to use items that are a little bit different than mine, or if you want to create this exact ribbon skirt, definitely use these supplies. So starting off with fabric, I prefer cotton fabric, and for your first few ribbon skirts, I would recommend using just plain solid colors. That way you don't really have to worry about the print or the orientation of the print, and it's a lot simpler. So I recommend a 1.5 yards to 2 yards, but for your first few skirts, 1 yard to 1.5 yards is probably fine. And this specific fabric right here, it's a solid cotton fabric. This is a little over 1.75 yards, and this is plenty of fabric to make a skirt. You're also going to need your choice of ribbons. So these are 1.5 inch ribbons, and then I chose to do the classic fire colors, so black, red, a lighter red, orange, yellow, and white. Then you're also going to need matching threads for your ribbons and for your skirt. This just kind of helps everything look cohesive. You can choose to use different colors for your ribbons if that's what you want to do, but I personally like all my stuff to match. Then you can also use a pair of scissors or a fabric roller. Either one is fine. I use both throughout my process, and this is just for cutting ribbons and cutting fabric. Then you're also going to want some elastic for the waistband and a safety pin that will help you put the elastic in later on. And then a glue stick. So this is a new method I've been using for putting my ribbons on, and I think is super easy for beginners, so I would definitely recommend a glue stick. This one's just a plain washable Elmer's glue stick. Then you're also going to need an iron and an ironing board, not pictured here, but I do have one. This is just to iron everything out and make everything super crisp. That way everything comes out even and it's not like crooked and wonky. You're also going to need a sewing machine. I'll show you mine here in a second. So this is my sewing machine. I have a Baby Lock Presto 2, and I'll show you guys all the different settings for all the different seams and stuff that I sew. Something else that's optional is a serger. This helps with creating nice seams on the inside of your fabric. This is optional. It's really helpful if you have one, but I will show you how you can sew the seams and it'll be totally fine. You don't need a serger. It's not the end of the world, but it's a nice tool to have if you're going to be sewing frequently. Okay, so step 1 is to go ahead and unfold your fabric. And mine is pre-washed, so I definitely recommend pre-washing it because sometimes fabric tends to shrink a little bit. And now I'm going to take it over to the ironing board and iron out all the creases. Okay, so now I'm going to take my fabric scissors and cut the fabric in half. So I'm just going to cut along that seam right there. Okay, now that it's cut in half, we're going to take one side and just set it aside for later because we don't really need it for right now. Now it's time for the fun part, which is the ribbons. And what I like to do is line up the top part of whichever's going to be the top part of the skirt to the top part of my fabric mat, and then I can line up my ribbons along the fabric or the lines on the actual mat. And I first just like to lay that out to see how many ribbons are gonna go on it. Okay, so now that I've got all my ribbons like laid out, I can kind of decide where I want them. So for this specific skirt, I think I'm gonna have them more towards the middle instead of the bottom. And this skirt's already gonna be a little bit shorter. So I wanna have the ribbons in the middle. I can't decide if I want them to be touching or not. I think I do wanna leave a little bit of space in between them. Let's see. Usually I like to leave, I don't prefer the big spaces, I prefer the smaller spaces in between ribbons. So about a ½ inch in between each ribbon. So something along these lines. And once you get the configuration right, you can do larger space in between, you can do no spaces in between. That is kind of a separate issue because that's a little bit different when it comes actually time to sew the ribbons down. So I'm just going to show you ½ inch space in between all of the ribbons. And now you can get your glue stick and we can glue them down. All right, I got my Elmer's glue stick and I'm basically just going to flip over whatever ribbon I'm going to start with. So I'm starting with the black one. And I'm just going to put a thin layer of glue all the way across the ribbon. You don't really have to worry too much about the ends of the ribbon because some of them will be hanging off when you sew it, so it's not super important. So any part that's going to be touching the fabric, try to do a nice thin layer of glue on. Then you flip the ribbon over and you can go ahead and put it on. Make sure the lines match up on either side. And then press it nice and flat. There you go. And now you can just repeat that process for all of your ribbons. Once you've completed all the ribbons, I would recommend letting it sit for 5 to 10 minutes before you actually start sewing down the ribbons. The glue obviously isn't going to be super strong, but it's just going to be enough to keep the ribbons down while you're sewing. Coming over to my sewing machine to sew on all the ribbons, the setting that I use for my specific sewing machine is setting 6, which is the zigzag stitch with a knot on the start. Okay, and then I like to change my width of my zigzags to 5, and then the space in between my stitches I change typically to 2, and then I'm ready to start sewing on my ribbons on. Okay, so I'm starting off with my black ribbon first. And I'm just going to sew it all the way straight to the end. I'm going to start with the inside seam of the black ribbon first. I also try to line up the edge of the ribbon with the center line on the foot of my sewing machine. So it's really helpful if there are lines on the feet of your sewing machine, which typically they do, depending on how old your sewing machine is. Then I move on to the dark red ribbon. Okay, so now that you've sewn all your ribbons on, it's time to actually assemble the whole skirt. So you're gonna put both of the pieces face together or ribbons together, and I like to serge my sides together, but I'll show you the order in which I do the sides and the bottom, the top, and all that good stuff, because I do it there's probably a better way to do it, but this is just how I do it. So I'm gonna first start off with putting these face together. Okay, so now that I have them faces together, I like to use these like sewing clips. You can also just use regular pins. I find these to be a little bit easier for me. But I go and smooth the whole thing out, and then I'm gonna go under each ribbon, flip the skirt up, make sure everything lines up nice and evenly, and then I take a clip and I clip it down. I'm gonna do that all the way across. Alright, and now once I have all my ribbons clamped, I'm just going to put a few pins along the sides and then take it over to my serger. Okay, so we're at my serger. So if you do not have a serger, that's okay. You can just sew the sides up with your regular sewing machine and then just kind of trim the ends with scissors to kind of make a smoother, cleaner cut. That would be what I would recommend if you don't have a serger, which is what I used to do before. A serger just helps to create cleaner edges, and that's what I'm gonna do now. So I'm gonna start off with just the one side that I've already completed with all the clips and stuff, and I'm just gonna serge it all together. Ooh. Okay, so I've serged one whole side, and now the edge is nice and clean, so I'm going to take out all the pins. Okay, and then now you can either do the top or the bottom. So I like to just do one serged edge across the bottom and the top before I sew the other side together. And this is just what works for me. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but this is just how I do it. Alright, and then I'm going to turn it and repeat the same thing at the top. Okay, so now we're going to take it back to our sewing mats, and do the other side of the ribbons. Okay, so once you're done sewing up both sides, the top and the bottom, you should just have a tube of skirt. And keeping it inside out, you're gonna I'll start with the bottom on how to fold up the hem and stuff like that. So that side is my bottom. And basically what I'm gonna do is fold it like this, about maybe half of an inch. And then I'm gonna iron it down flat. Then fold it again and iron it down flat. Then I'm gonna sew over that, if that makes sense. And then you'll do the same thing at the top, you'll just do the folds much bigger, but I'll show you how I do the bottom part. Okay, so for the bottom, I'm just going to take my skirt and I'm just gonna fold this side about half an inch-ish, and then lay it flat and take the iron and just do a quick iron across like that, and then let it cool down a little bit. Then you can take it and fold it again. And then once you've folded it for the second time, go ahead and iron it down. Okay, and that's the bottom hem. So now I'm gonna go back to my sewing machine and I'm gonna zigzag stitch over this edge right here. So I've kept my settings the same for the most part. The only thing that I've changed is I've made the width of my stitch 6 instead of 5, and that's the only difference. Everything else is the exact same. Okay, so now back to the ironing board. This is the top part of the ribbon skirt. So what I'm gonna do is do the same thing I did last time, which is fold it one time. And this one doesn't have to be a very, very big fold, just fold it one time and then iron it down. Okay, and then let that cool down a little bit. Okay, and then you're gonna fold it again. This time you're gonna fold it much larger because we wanna fit a piece of elastic in here, which is gonna pull the whole skirt together. Then now going to iron it again. Okay, now we can take this back to the sewing machine and do the same thing. You're gonna sew down on this fold right here, but the only difference is this time, before you get to the end, you're gonna leave about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of space where we can put the elastic in. Okay, so now once you have a little bit of space to insert the elastic, you're gonna take your elastic. So this is just some thin elastic. If you like a thicker waistband, you can do a thicker one. I personally like this size. And then I'm gonna take that safety pin that we talked about in the beginning and I'm gonna poke it through the end of the elastic. That way I can feed the safety pin through this space in the waistband, which is exactly what I'm gonna do. Okay, once you have pulled all the elastic through, just go around making sure all the elastic is nice and flat. And then I go ahead and just safety pin mine together for the time being. Okay. Now we're gonna go ahead and sew the elastic pieces together with our sewing machine, now that we know it's all nice and straight. Alright, our elastic is now sewn together. We can tuck it in, and then our last step is just sewing together the space that we left to insert our elastic. We're just gonna sew that completely shut. Alright, and here is our final product for our ribbon skirt. I think she turned out great, and this is a great beginner ribbon skirt if you've never made a ribbon skirt before or you're just getting into sewing. It doesn't have any of the fancy stuff on it, but let me know if you guys want to see me make ribbon skirts with pockets, hanging ribbons, bias tape, all that good stuff. I'd love to make more ribbon skirt tutorials. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!